Viewers be advised. Today's episode contains themes of suicide and may not be appropriate for all audiences.
I am really just tired of surviving day to day with this heavy worry.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Reesa and I'm your host. We are talking to real families about real stories here on The Real Family Eats, where we've got food for thought and thoughtful food. So let's eat. Hey everyone, so my guest today is the lovely Jamie. Hi Jamie, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Yes, absolutely. I am so excited to chat with you today as well as hear about this yummy recipe that you're going to share with us. But first, for anybody who doesn't know you, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, I'm Jamie. I live in a rural town in Wyoming. I'm a mom of two boys, 12 and almost 6, going on much older years than I expected as far as attitude.
Yes.
I am a teacher. I've been a teacher for 2 decades now and am moving into middle school science after teaching middle school math. So lots of
Oh,
middle
wow.
school and then come home to middle schoolers. So there's a lot of skibbities and flossing in my life.
Yes, I was going to say, I mean, it takes a special person to be willing to work with middle schoolers. So thank you for your service.
Yeah. I think kindergarten teachers have it worse. So God bless the kindergarten teacher next year that has my kid.
It's just a different milestone, right?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so excited to have you on. I know you've got a special recipe that you're sharing with us today, so I'd love to know about that. But first, you've also got a lovely resource that you found that you wanted to do a shout out to for our shameless plug section. So tell us about that.
So Casting for Recovery is a breast cancer opportunity for women who are going through breast cancer, have survived breast cancer 20 years ago. They offer free retreats. On the weekends, you apply, and it's once a year, and most states have them. They just did their first Hawaii Casting for Recovery.
Wow.
I was a participant in 2021 here in Wyoming, and it really was the start of my healing process. And it's not just
Yeah.
for Fisher women. It's just really a great support group to meet with women who have gone through breast cancer. I was only 2 months out from chemo when I went, and but I met other single moms and women who have survived for 20 years after their diagnosis, and it's just an amazing um, organization. That's the word I was looking for. Organization. So if you've had
Yeah.
breast cancer or you're a survivor of breast cancer, look up Casting for Recovery. If you haven't and you feel like donating, those donations all go to the women that attend those retreats.
Wow, that's so awesome. And I know you're going to talk to us a little bit about how that ties with your parenting journey. We'll make sure to get all of that linked into our show notes. So for anybody that resonates with them, that would be a support group right up your alley, or someone you want to um, donate to, we'll be able to find those links in our show notes. So make sure you check
Perfect.
those out, folks.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what is this recipe that you're sharing with us today?
So this is great grandpa's mac and cheese, and
Ooh.
it's one that my family makes every special holiday, and my dad
Okay.
always made. And then when I had my own household, I would call him every Thanksgiving Eve and Christmas, December 23rd, and say, "I need the recipe for mac and cheese." But I've now made it enough that it's memorized, so it was hard for me to give you measurements because I kind of
Yeah.
just go now with it. So I'm like the
Yes.
official mac and cheese maker of our family.
Oh, that's a nice title.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, so get me started. What do I need to be doing first? And then we'll jump into kind of your story.
Sure. I tried to make it in one pot, but if two is easier, you're in boil your noodles. We use
Okay.
the fat rigatoni one so the cheese gets inside. It's delicious and gooey.
Oh, yeah.
And then in like a saute pan, I take 4 tablespoons of butter and I chop my celery and onions because my kids don't like green things. So they're very fine. And you just kind of saute them first. You're in a
Okay.
lower elevation, so your water probably doesn't take as long to boil as mine does.
Yeah, so I actually turned it on right before we started chatting. So I'm about at a boil. So I'm getting ready to add my noodles. And then I've got a second pot to do some of the other stuff. So you said in my other pot, I can do my sauteing, correct?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes.
Perfect. All right. So I'll get this started. And while we do that, I know you mentioned, you kind of alluded to it, that part of your journey does kind of incorporate your wellness and being diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I'd love to hear kind of that side of things. I mean, to have a diagnosis like that in the midst of parenting and kind of being able to show up does not sound easy.
Yeah. It was quite a challenge. 2020 was a rough year for everyone.
Okay.
That happened to be the year my marriage also devolved and ended. And so as a teacher, we were trying to figure out things on our end for education, how to keep kids and ourselves safe. We were all kind of in lockdown, and my husband decided that it was time for him to move on. So he left in May 2020. So I was a single mom with, let's see, then 8. Oh, he wasn't quite 8. So almost 7 and almost 2. So very
Okay.
young kids, very, very little. And
Yeah.
just kind of trying to figure that out. And then the fall of 2021 came and we went back to school in person. So how that, that um, was also very stressful, plus going in the midst of divorce, which was a very, no one prepares you for that, I don't think. Like, you don't go into a marriage ready for a divorce.
Yeah.
And so that was challenging. But I had my first mammogram, which I think is very important at 40. I had never been one for self exams, but I do find that to be important, especially women in their 30s, since you can't have a mammogram quite yet. So I had my first mammogram and they informed me that my breast tissue was too dense to see anything. So they expressed some concern and said, we would prefer you do an MRI opposite of your mammogram every year. So like every 6 months we're checking on you, and that way we know we can see everything.
Okay.
So 6 months goes by and I was supposed to have my MRI in December and I ended up having it in January, on January 5th of 2021, and we didn't even leave the parking lot and the doctor called and said they found a mass. A tumor.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, that's not good when they're calling you outside the parking lot.
Right. And that was fast. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So they wanted me to come in and do a biopsy to check if it was, in fact, cancer or something else, because there's other things that can happen in your breast besides tumors. So another reason that you should always check yourself. And so I went in about a week later and she called me the next day and it was in fact cancer. So it was kind of just then this whirlwind, single mom. We're getting ready for court dates for a divorce. I'm still in the middle of teaching COVID style. We've been quarantined 2 or 3 times. So it's just like,
wow.
Okay, well, we're just gonna, survival kicks in and you just do what you have to do.
Yeah. I'm so like, what was the narrative going on in your mind kind of at that moment? Like you said, you've got almost just like one thing after another. It sounds like that that's a challenge on its own. and now we're kind of doing it all together. What was going on for you as far
I
as your
felt like a
narrative or
sad country
yeah?
song was describing my life. I was just waiting for my dog to die and my truck to run me over.
Yeah. Okay.
I was very, my parents had just moved to our community a year prior. And so they really had stepped in and helped a lot with childcare and the boys. And whenever we were sick, how you do that. Um, so I had a good support system for the divorce part.
Okay.
My friends and community were very good as well. And then when the cancer diagnosis came in, it was like a rally between our local church, my school, and the district. I was like, I'll just put off chemo till the summer. It'll be fine. We'll get through the school year. And they're like, no, you're gonna do chemo when you're supposed to.
Yeah. So tell me why was that your go-to of like, oh, I'll wait till the summer. It almost sounds like kind of this idea of like, I don't want to inconvenience anyone, even though, I mean,
Yeah.
you just got diagnosed with cancer.
So something about a teacher job is that it's sometimes a lot easier just to go in sick than to do all the sub plans. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. Now, I honestly believe through God's direction, we had a teacher who had student taught underneath me and taught fifth grade. I taught fifth grade at the time. And so she knew everything about fifth grade. We were headed into testing season, and fifth grade's a big testing year. And so I was really like, oh my gosh. And they're like, would you stop and go do what you need to do? You take care of yourself. We have this teacher in place, and she took over and did a phenomenal job. And so and my boss in the district were just incredible supports for that. And they were just like, no, you do what you need to do, and we will take care of things here. You don't worry about school.
Wow. Do you think that some of that mentality of kind of worrying about everybody else and you kind of on that back burner, is that something that has always been a part of your narrative? Do you think that kind of intensified? I feel like I hear that a lot with parents. We're so good at like, let's care for everything else, make sure put out all those other fires, that we're kind of last thoughts when it comes to like our own self, our own wellness.
Yeah, I do think moms especially, I'm not a dad or a male, so I can't speak for that gender, but I do think moms especially, especially single moms, we put everybody else first. We want to make sure our kids aren't lacking because they're lacking this structured household, this picture perfect, two-parent family. They're now lacking that. A lot of times kids are going back and forth between jobs, or sorry, they're not working. They're going back and forth between parents. And that causes such an instability in kids' lives, coming back from usually typically a very free non-rule household, and then having to come back to mom's house where we have schoolwork and all those things. And I do think that's a struggle for a lot of single moms, and have to experience that. I don't have to because my kid's dad lives so far away. He does not see them very often, but I do think you're trying to do so much, and then having only one income, you're really working to keep that job and to make sure that you're finding favor with your bosses so you can keep that job.
Yeah, almost like there's, a lot more at stake, like you said, when you're kind of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that for you, that was part of your narrative that you had kind of in your brain, that because of the divorce that, your house was now kind of less than, so we need to do something more to be able to kind of make up for that?
Yes, especially when the surgeries came with the breast cancer. So on February 1st, I had my first lumpectomy, and they didn't get clear margins, and there was miscommunication. So they woke me up and we moved on. And then later on that week, we found out we'd have to go back in. So I went back in the next week. on February 5th. Oh, sorry, February 7th.
For
And
anybody who
had a
doesn't know kind
second.
of what clear, oh, I was just going to ask for those that don't know kind of anything about breast cancer, like
Sure.
what do you mean by clear margins? Like, can you tell me more about that?
So from what I understand in my layman's reading, um, tumor cells, right, should have like a stopping point. And so when
Okay.
they went to go take out the tumor, which was not a huge tumor, they couldn't get clear non-cancer cells. They couldn't get enough of a biopsy or the flush out enough that they had non-cancer cells.
Okay, gotcha.
So they would send that to the lab, and then the lab came back in there and they're like, there's not clear margins here. So then I had to go back the next week. And I was a fairly busty woman, so I had double D's. There was a lot of breast tissue there. And they went
Yeah.
in and he took out probably half of my breast tissue and still couldn't find a clear margin. So
Oh,
then the
wow.
plan, yeah, so then the care plan changed to we have to do a mastectomy because your right breast could be the same way. We just don't know.
Mm,
So
okay.
it was a pretty scary time at that time where, we probably need to go ahead and do a full double mastectomy where they remove all the breast tissue.
Yeah. I heard you mention, scary time. I mean, what's going on in your brain like when you hear those words? I mean, can you tell me more about that?
Sure. So I think the scariest thing is when we went to the doctor and mom came with me, and my dad almost broke down and asked if I was going to survive this. What
Oh, wow.
exactly? Because we have two young kids here,
Yeah.
and so the doctor reassured him it's just stage 1. I think what was 1B or something. And
Okay.
so it wasn't, it's treatable. It's going to be a little bit of a long road. At this time, we didn't know the exact care plan, other than the surgeries, but it like she's going to live through this. You're not going to lose
Mm.
her. But just watching my parents go through that, and then at the same time trying to raise a now 2.5-year-old who has no idea what's going on, and
Mm-hmm.
then my now 8-year-old who knows but doesn't quite understand, um plus work, and I'm still in the middle of divorce proceedings. So I had my first lumpectomy on February 1st, and my divorce wasn't final till later on that week. I was laying in bed from recovery when my lawyer called and said the divorce was final.
Wow.
So
So really in it.
yeah, yeah. And I really don't, I think my narrative, I remember crying a lot and
Mhm.
listening to worship music, the same song. I wish I could remember names as well as I do, how to teach strategies, but it was, be still my soul. And just that piece, praying over and over again, like, I have no idea how we're going to get through this.
Mhm.
And then, so we were still living in our own home, but then before my double mastectomy, my parents moved us into their house. So now my kids have lost their dad, their mom is sick, and they've lost their home. And so it was just like, how do I help my kids through this? And how do I make this as normal as I can?
Yeah. And gosh, that's such a a hard one to navigate while also still, doing very real things that need to happen for your well-being so that you can stick around and you can be there for
Mm-hmm.
these young kids as you mentioned. I'm so curious, I heard you kind of talk a little bit about um, you know, that your kiddos knew kind of something was happening. One of them, at least, and the younger one, not so much. Like, how do you have that conversation? What did that look like?
Um, so Nathan's a very black and white, factual kind of kid. He always has been. When he would get in trouble, he'd have to know the reason why. And then the punishment would have to be the same every single time. He's just kind of that boundary pusher. And so
Okay.
just black and white, hey, mommy's got bad cells in her body. And she's gonna be going to the doctor a lot. I didn't really consider feelings and mental health or wellness as much as I maybe should have at that time. Because frankly, I didn't know about it as much as I do now. We've been pushing mental health and awareness in our schools and in our professional developments. I wish I had sat down and really talked about those feelings more with him.
Mm.
He's very resilient. He'd been through the same things I had been through from a kid perspective. So it really we were able to have some really good conversations that led into, I used it to talk about puberty later on because he's getting old enough that was starting to be an issue with kids at school. And I wanted him to hear from me versus kids at school about our thoughts and our ideals about sex. And so it kind of opened that up because I was cutting off such a feminine body part that it was easy to, it led into a lot of those deeper conversations.
Gotcha. I heard you mention kind of, looking back, kind of, maybe you would have taken more of that time, as you mentioned, for the kind of emotional piece of it and the mental wellness. Can you tell me more about kind of why you mentioned that and kind of what were maybe even some of your hesitations back then?
I'm not sure that they were hesitations. I'm just not sure that I knew how or what.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so, like I said, really until this last year or two, in our area, in our school, we're very lacking in mental health care. We're very
Okay.
rural, and and so to get that mental health care doesn't happen easily. But I probably should have sat down with a counselor a few times, even with him, just to help him talk it through. But he also is an in the moment kind of kid. So if it's not affecting him in the moment, he really
Mm.
didn't. Like it didn't
Yeah.
appear to bother him.
Yeah. Would you say that, as far as the mental health component, was that something that was a part of your own narrative as well? Because I know you mentioned kind of your kiddo. I'm curious, kind of for yourself, and now looking back on it, kind of were there any insights or maybe thoughts now knowing the information that like you said, with more awareness?
Yeah,
That
I think if I'd had to do that experience over again, knowing what I know now, I would definitely make some appointments with, they had a social worker at the oncology center as a
Okay.
family, my mom and dad, and Nathan and I. Jace Paul had been too little, but he, even just to be there, just to kind of sit and work through those feelings. And hey, it's okay to feel these feelings. It's okay to feel whatever feelings you're wanting, and having more frequent check-ins. But frankly, once I had that mastectomy, those 2 weeks right after were such a blur. But then I started chemo in April, late April, early May, and I don't remember much.
Okay. Is that a common side effect for the chemo? Or
I
do you think that
think
was your brain's way of protecting you?
um I think it was, and then of course they give you so many medications
Mm.
that I really found myself journaling more. And then now they'll pop up, like I would put it on private only in Facebook and had journaled some things, experiences, and I read those now and I'm like, really, that's what I went through, it just
Oh,
kind
wow.
of,
Okay.
yeah, those feelings, those really raw feelings that you really shouldn't put on Facebook. So I put it on the private page so I could at least write it out for um my own sanity and just to get it out and know that maybe I'm not a crazy person after all. And then
Yeah.
but it's to reread those years later, it's like, wow, I really did overcome a lot in 2 years. When you're in the midst of it, you don't realize exactly what's happening.
Yeah. And that's such, what, that you mentioned that um that tip almost of writing something on Facebook and doing it to the private only and using that as kind of a journal, because I think that's such a unique resource that I would have never thought about. And to be able to do it, like you said, and kind of keeping it more as that journal piece of it. And to really be able to have a place where it sounds like for you, it was a place to go to put everything that might be kind of ruminating in there, and get it outside of yourself. And that, like you said, now it sounds like it's been able, to be a reminder of maybe what you have endured, but also overcome.
Yes. Yeah.
That's huge. Was that something that just came to you? Did someone else tell you about that? Because I've never heard that little like pro tip before of using Facebook as your journal.
No, I had found I liked writing. Of course, when you write your whole raw feelings on Facebook, like people get upset with that.
Why do you say that? Tell me more. Oh my gosh, I want to hear more
Oh,
about that.
like if someone, I'm in my 40s now, so if somebody bothers me, like I just like whatever, like go live your
Yeah.
life. But when you're in your 20s and your 30s, like everything is still so sensitive, and you're still kind of in, that high school mentality of, oh, these people still don't like me, or these people really hurt my feelings, and so you put it out there like, if you don't like me and you want to talk bad about me, you know what I mean? Like just those silly
Uh-huh.
things. And you look back in your 40s and 50s. So in your 20s and 30s, understand by the time you hit 40 and 50, you're too tired, you don't care. But in your 20s and 30s,
that.
when you're going through that, everything seems so important and you want everybody
Yeah.
to like you. And so then it becomes this drama on Facebook, right? And the Facebook bullying, or now you kids use your your X and your Instagrams, and I'm old school AOL and MySpace.
Mate. Absolutely. I'm still learning some of those. I have to have my younger siblings teach me about social media.
I always tell my students back in the 1900s. Um,
I love that.
um,
Yeah.
but I just, when you put that out there, I need to get it out. Once I have those feelings out, I always call it, when I have to brain dump, like I have to have a diary of the brain.
Yeah.
When I'm thinking, when I'm planning, if I can just get it out, then I know that I won't forget, or, it'll be just this idea that just sparks other things. So even when I'm teaching or planning, but especially with my feelings in that whole situation, I mean, there were some incredible moments throughout that, um, throughout that process.
Yeah.
Shortly after my second lumpectomy, um, so I had, like, I woke up one day and it just felt tight. Now remember, I'm missing half my breast tissue out of my left side, but it
Okay.
just felt tight. And as the day went on, my double D became a double F, and then it became a double H, and it
Wow.
was bursting out of my bra. And sorry if this is too much information for people
Uh,
listening, but this is the
this is
facts
the
of
real
life.
stuff, guys.
Yeah.
Right? Exactly. That's what we're going for.
And so I had a friend drive me. My mom watched James Paul because he was super little. I don't remember. Maybe she had Nathan too. And so I had a friend drive me to the breast center, to the surgeon, and he tried with this little teeny needle to try to get some of this excess. Well, remember, my breast tissue is very dense, so that needle
Yeah.
touched it not even. It was like sticking um, a butter knife into the Hoover Dam. Like it
Oh my
was like
goodness.
nothing, right? So they called down to the breast center, and by now I'm like slightly fevering and like just in so much pain and so uncomfortable. And they open up. I remember them opening up my dressing gown, and it was the doctor, the ultrasound tech, and the nurse. And they had actually had done my initial biopsy of my breast and put in the marker. And so this is the third or fourth time we've met, and their faces were in this shock and horror as they
Oh my
beheld
goodness.
the condition.
And as a patient, to like see these care professionals, right? They're supposed to be the experts in there to kind of have that. I imagine that would be so scary and overwhelming.
So I was like, it's pretty bad. And they're like, yeah. So then she begins to try to extract this extra fluid. But remember, I'm like a rawhide rhino here. And she cannot get the needle to get through the breast tissue to get to where essentially this open crater of fluid has formed. And so she sent the ultrasound tech and the nurse to go down to the OR and get like abdominal plungers, thicker needles, a bucket.
Oh, a bucket. Oh my goodness.
There. And she finally penetrates to get to where all this fluid is, and she is just pulling more and more. It's just the two of us. So I'm not sanitized enough to help. Like I didn't wash my hands to help with the procedure, right? I'm just laying there with this cloth on me.
I don't think people go in there thinking that they're going to help with their own procedure. Yeah, for sure.
So she's pulling, and then she'd get another one and pull and just pull, and vials and vials. And her hand was like shaking and sweating. And she's a very fit woman. She's very athletic. She's very strong. And so she's like sweating and shaking. And we get down to the last vial, and the other two ladies walk in. They're like, we have everything. And we both look at them like, you're too late.
We needed you a long time ago.
But at one point, we all broke out singing during the middle of the procedure.
Oh my goodness. Like, what a bizarre and just like, interesting story to kind of walk away from.
So, if those are sauteed, you can pour your cream of celery soup in and fill it with milk and pour it in also.
Perfect. So actually, before we continue, I'm going to go drain my noodles and I'll be right back. All right.
So that's the kind of experiences I wrote down in my journal.
Yeah. And then you're saying that like to this day, you don't necessarily, it wasn't like front of mind, kind of remembering those stories?
Right. So then I read those and I laugh because it was a lot to go through.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was there anything kind of looking back on some of that, because I heard you mention even just like an insight and awareness, and maybe even a compassion to yourself of how much you have accomplished. Was there a particular one that for you read and you was just kind of that aha moment, or that just, altering kind of that mindset for you?
No, honestly, I probably haven't really. It's only been the last few months that I've really begun to reflect on those things. So much in my life had changed in those 2 or 3 years that you were still trying to go through it. And so just recently, over the last 6 months, I've been seeing a counselor through the oncology center, and she's kind of brought some of those things to light where, you really did, like, that's not a normal journey, your journey. And I always kind of, I only had 4 rounds of chemo, and I didn't have any radiation. And so I always kind of felt like I didn't go through as much as other breast cancer patients. But when you're in that situation, you really can't compare stories. Even if you have a small cancer, it's still cancer, right? And you still live with that fear afterwards that, oh, is it going to come back? And
Yes.
I expressed that. I When I got my diagnosis, I had just grown out my hair like 3 or 4 months prior from having James Paul. You're just gonna let
Okay.
that boil, and then you'll add your cheese.
Perfect. Now the cheddar, do I want that grated?
I grade mine, yeah.
Okay, perfect. I can do that.
And then I cut my Velveeta like in blocks, just so it melts
Perfect.
faster. And then when it's all kind of gooey, then you put your noodles in there and it's ready.
Okay. Yum. All right. You were saying.
So, I just kind of grown out my hair where I really enjoyed it again, and it was long, and then
Yeah.
it was about 2 months later I got my diagnosis, and I knew I was going to lose it again. So now here like I've been growing it out since 2020. I'm
Hmm.
sorry, since 2021. And I tell my hairdresser, I'm like, we're gonna get this out. And now I'm like, it's gonna come back. I just know it. I'm 3 years out. If you can make it to year 5, your chances of recurrence are very slim. I'm like, am I gonna make it to year 5? There's ladies that
Wow.
get to year 7 and they get it again. So now that
Hmm.
it's just this perpetual fear that's in the back of your mind anytime something's going wrong. Oh, I have this bone ache. Is it just because I'm old and exercised more than I should have, or lifted something that I haven't lifted? Or, oh, is it bone cancer? So it's just this, and I'm not the only one that feels this way. So I apologize if I sound paranoid, but that's what
Mm,
people are
good.
going through when they've had cancer at least once. That,
Yeah.
is it going to come back? Is it this again?
Hmm. And I think what you mentioned, yeah, I hear you saying, you know, the paranoia, but I think what you're mentioning sounds like it was very real to kind of your experience. And I know I've heard that from other folks as well, where you do kind of live, it sounds like, in this limbo land for quite some time and
Mhm.
almost holding your breath.
Yes. Yeah, and you just have to really make those choices. Last summer I took my boys on a road trip to Kentucky, and then we went up to Ohio by
Okay.
myself. First time I traveled with them by myself in a car, without another grown up. And
Hmm.
it was really one of those kind of empowering steps that, oh, I can do this. Like, I can live my life, and we can do these things together as a family and build these memories. I think sometimes getting locked into that, oh, it's going to come back. This does hold you hostage, and you don't live your life. So it's that key of then finding, even after divorce, finding, how do you move on and live your life, you know?
Yeah. What what do you think for you was that aha moment of, like you said, I have that choice in that moment?
I I think it was the very earliest would have been that weekend at Casting for Recovery.
Wow.
Just that I'm not alone, and there's these women that have gone through this 20 years prior, when technology was even uh, archaic at the time. We
Hmm.
used to do chemo through IV veins and burn people's, veins out.
Wow.
But they're surviving, and they've thrived, and they've raised their kids, and now they're on grandkids, and they've had their careers, and they've been successful. So to watch women go through that and see kind of the down the line, 20 years down the line, I can do this, was
Hmm.
really that weekend for me.
Yeah.
um, there was still a lot of health issues following. My implants got infected. um, just that recovery, it takes a long time to get over chemo, and just kind of those recoveries, and then estrogen suppressors so the cancer doesn't come back, because mine was estrogen fed cancer.
Okay.
um it really, I would say it probably wasn't until 2023 where I was finally like, this has got to be the year that we don't have something that sucks.
Oh my goodness. And to have that, you said 2023, right?
We have to be done just surviving today. Like this is the year that we are going to do these things and do them better, and we've got to move on from this. And so I don't know if there was an initial event that happened, but I was like, I am really just tired of surviving day to day with this heavy worry. Like, it's not healthy for my boys. Nathan went into 6th grade last year, and I really feel like I'm losing time with him before he graduates. James Paul starts kindergarten this year. It's just time is going. My kids are getting older, and I can't sit in this fear of another diagnosis. If it comes, it comes. We'll get through it again. But I can't hold back these memories from my kids out of fear for myself. Yeah.
Was that a hard transition in your mind to make? Because that sounds
it really was. In fact, I think in the summer of 2023, someone's like, hey, I'm doing this great weight loss program, and you want to try it. And I was like, I don't even know who I am. Like, I haven't even processed. I don't even think I had started grieving. I don't think I ever grieved from my divorce until this last year and a half. And I've been divorced, it's been 4 years, but I was so go, try to survive. And then this cancer diagnosis that I really still hadn't finished grieving through that loss. And then the grief of cancer and what you think that your life should be like. Like, no one plans their day to be like, hey, this year I'm going to get divorced and have breast cancer and move a house. And like, no one sets out purposely to plan that I know of. Now, there might be someone who does, and Lord speed for you, but that's not my
to each his
goal in
own
life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you mentioned kind of that grieving, and that, even now is probably kind of the first year that, or, since, that you've started to broach some of that. And I imagine, kind of similar to other folks, that grieving process is not as linear as that nice model that they used to, show you of like, oh, this is how you grieve.
My friend really spoke that to me. She lost her son this year to suicide. And she just looked at me one day. She goes, no one tells you how exhausting grief is. And I was like, boy, you hit that right on the head.
Yes.
You're so exhausted. And I thought, you are absolutely correct. And it is just, you're just surviving. So, when you ask those questions, or when a therapist asks you those questions about what are those moments, what are you thinking of? And I'm going, I don't know that I was. I think I was just surviving, trying to put one foot in front of the other every day. And and then the next thing you know, it's been a week, and then it's been a month, and then it's been a year. But it's just, just this last really 18 months that I'm like, okay, we can do this. Like, we're going to move on, and we're going to keep going. Because I'm going to miss out on chances with my kids if I sit and worry.
Yeah. Was that a big motivator for you?
I think so. Like, one of the conflicts we had in our marriage, and I don't talk negatively about my ex, so I'm trying to do this in a very politically correct way, was vacations. And vacations always seemed to be back to his family's home, which is great. And it's a huge city, and there's a lot to do there. But there's so much more to the world than that town. There's so much more to the world than our little community. And a lot of kids don't leave here. So when I took my kids on that road trip last year, it was so empowering because we did it, and we stayed overnight, and we navigated some huge towns, and we, and we drove for days and days and days.
Which that in itself, that's like a whole nother podcast, right? Of like driving cross country with your children in the car.
Right. Doing like vacations that are restful with children. That doesn't That doesn't happen.
That's so true. You know what? It's so funny that you mentioned that, because I've seen those like memes or whatever where it says, vacation when you have kids is just parenting in another location. And I was like, you're right.
Well, that's like, I remember, so both my boys were born in the summer. Nathan was born in July. And so the first summer that he was born, we were already halfway through the summer. And then the second summer, he was just a year. And so, it's hard. I'm pleased one's listening and thinking I'm discounting the newborn year, because it's a nightmare. But then trust me, you hit third grade and middle school and you want newborn again.
And I think you're so right. Like, each milestone has like its own new challenges.
Oh, it is amazing. And each kid you raise goes through that milestone so differently. Yes. Nathan never had an imaginary friend. We have a special place for one of James Paul's at dinner.
There you go.
We had to take him on. And one's so emotional and one's not emotional. I'm just like, I don't know. Like, just when I figure you out.
It's not a one size fits all, and that makes parenting that much more difficult, right?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm so curious, kind of now with some of the insight, and some of the awareness that it sounds like you've been able to have. Do you find that going through what you did and such, like you said, not only were you having to learn and have the growing pain of single parenting now you're single parenting with your own very serious medical diagnosis, so much so as, like you said, that, your own parents were kind of at that place of, what does this mean for our future? So you've got, that happening at the same time you're trying to parent, and they're likely going through their own milestones and their own like struggles. Was that difficult to balance that, to give attention to what needed the attention?
Yeah, and I think, I've read a few things on Facebook lately, and I know Facebook's not the Bible, but that firstborn really teaches you how to grow up, right? You really grow when you're raising that firstborn child. And there's things I did with Nathan that I didn't do with James Paul, and there's ways I handle things with Nathan that I handle different with James Paul, not because they're just different kids, but because I know better now, right? Like I said, the mental health awareness, those sorts of things, and taking care of yourself is so important. I honestly forgot your question.
Yeah, the balance of having, you're right on it, of that balance of trying to parent while also, like you said, kind of managing your own wellness. And
so where was that train going? I have no idea. I don't even have anybody interrupting me for that train to just go off track.
But we've given so many brain cells to our children, right? So, I think it's excusable. That's what I tell myself, at least.
So that balance, I think you just have to find time. And so when the boys would go to bed, and it's harder now that Nathan's older and in middle school and his bedtime's later, but when he was in elementary, he was in bed by 8. And I would honestly take from 8 to 9, and I would just sit. And some days I would just cry, and some days I would just sit in silence, and some days I pray, and sometimes I read my Bible, and I would just sit. But I knew God had a plan and a purpose for everything I was going through. And I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it at the time, because when you're going through that dark valley or that battle, you don't see the outcome and the victory that's coming, right? And I still am not sure what that is right now. But I know that there is a purpose for that hardship, and that it's going to turn out to be good for my kids, for me, for my parents, for others. God's going to use that, right, to help someone else. And even if it's just this podcast and that was a whole reason to go through that, then great. I always say, what do I always say? It just flips me again. I always say, you know, if my marriage was just for that 14 years, was only so I can have my boys, then it was worth all the pain afterwards. You know, I love my boys. They really are true blessings. Both of them are miracles. They overcame their own hardships with their birth and early childhood things. They still face challenges every day. One more mental health wise, one physically, and if just to be their mom was why I had to go through, and 14 years marriage, it was fine for 12 of it. It was a good marriage for 12 of it, and then it just kind of devolved into this whatever happened. But if it was just for that, if that pain was so I could still have my boys and raise them in a community that loves them and in a healthy school where they have every opportunity available to them, then so be it. Then that was worth it.
Wow. I mean, to be able to kind of have such a big heart to be able to say that, because I think that so many people would look at what you've had to overcome as part of your journey and would go, no way in the world would I want to do that, or that, you know, I could see the light at the other side of it. But the fact that, you know, it sounds like that heart is so big. Not only are you given to your students, but you're finding kind of this motivation and willingness to give back to others, to give back to your own kids, and being able to say if that's what it means, if that's what it took to do that, then I'm willing to do that. And that's just, gosh, that's so amazing, Jamie. And I love your big heart for people.
Well, thank you. I love people and I love telling my story, because it did suck. I was a sad country song.
Yes. Again, that theme, right? That's my life. That country song, that's my life.
Yeah. And so then we would joke at work early on. I was like, no, I'm just waiting for my Hallmark movie. So if you know any hunky looking 45 to 50-year-old men in flannel shirts, just send them my way.
That come riding up to you, right, on this like giant horse and like, oh yeah, I see your movie in my mind. I can see it. I love that. Oh my goodness. Well, I think you are very deserving of your Hallmark movie. So hey, let's get that production going. I'm so curious, kind of as we wrap up here, like if you had a time machine, or speaking to anybody who might be going through something that looks a little bit similar to your story, like what would you, if you could go back and tell yourself something to prepare yourself or just to normalize it, what would you say? Or what would you offer?
I would say, don't give up. It doesn't even have to be divorce or cancer. Life is hard. Life is hard now. Job loss, inflation, various flus that make things hard. Don't give up. And don't think you're alone. You know, I think we're a society, 2020 really made us a isolated society. And I don't think we have gotten out of that yet. Where we build fences and we don't know our neighbors and we don't ask for help and we kind of do things on our own. Don't do it by yourself. I would have never survived any of this had I tried to do it by myself. I had my parents, I had a group of core coworkers and friends that helped me through it. My best friend from high school would write me letters every week. Our church, the old ladies, the elderly ladies would save up their dollars and buy us KFC gift cards just so we could go out to lunch and have normal out to eat. Just don't go through this alone. There's people going through those situations, maybe not exactly the same, but they know how you feel. They know how it feels to lose a child. They know how it feels to lose a spouse, to lose your health. There's people out there. And I think there's more and more resources for that. So I would just tell people, don't give up and don't do it alone.
Yeah. And that's, gosh, such a quick reminder, because you're absolutely right that, if, you know, for whatever reason, and I've said this multiple times, that as parents, we do get really good at kind of shrinking inside, and it can feel really lonely, and it can be really difficult. You know, there's that whole idea, that narrative that so many people have of asking for help, like you said, as being some sort of a weakness or some sort of flaw with yourself because you couldn't do it. What, you know, why not? And that can just really compound that isolation, that loneliness, and that it is hard, and we need more people speaking out and normalizing the hardness, because goodness, it is not all sunshine and rainbows and just like, this is exactly how I picture parenting would be.
My life plan works perfectly.
Yeah, right? I mean, if it were that way, I wouldn't have a job. So let's just
that is true. That is true. We all need to be a mess so you can stay employed.
I mean, I say honestly, like, I would much rather be out of a job, because we're all like thriving and healthy, and like our mental health is great. I would put me out of a job, please.
Go back to singing. That's how you should have your career. That would be your career.
There you go. I gotta go back to the drawing board for that one.
That's right.
Well, I love that. So before we close out, is there any, I know you shared an awesome resource that sounds like was super helpful on your journey. Are there any other resources out there that you know of that might be useful to any of our listeners?
So I think a lot of times local churches, and it may not even be, the problem is like, if you are married and go to a church and then you split up, then you're kind of 50-50. But a lot of other churches have resources for divorce care. And and I do think seeing a therapist similar to yourself, or a family therapist for your kids, is very important through those beginning stages. We did not have that as an option. Like I said, we're very lacking here, but I really think that would have been helpful. I even looked for divorce care, but the nearest one was like in Lakewood, and again, it was 2020, so everything was pretty locked down, and Lakewood's 6 hours away from us, right? So and then if you do find yourself in a situation with cancer, the oncologist office has resources, social resources, transportation resources, housing help, medical help. You know, I found myself in a situation this last year where I couldn't pay my medical bills, and mentioned it to the social worker, and she was able to get me on a program to get me through this next, you know, just sometimes you just get stuck in a transition and we just need that little bit of help, right, to get us to the next step. But it's hard and it's humbling to ask for help, and I don't think people do that naturally, ask for help. But that would be my encouragement, is to find, if you find yourself in any of those resources, try to find some groups, support groups, just so you can get with people that have been through those moments. Because unless you've been through divorce or been through cancer, it's really, really hard to find those same feelings, you know. And so that would be my encouragement for other people.
Well, awesome. Okay, so this is kind of what mine looks like. How am I doing?
Oh, good. Did you by chance do any salt and pepper or ground mustard?
I did. I added that in.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, go for it.
I did. I added it when I had it kind of boiling.
That's when I did mine too. Yep, that's how I do it too.
Yes. Well, I'm so excited to give this a try and sneak some of those veggies into the kiddos. I mean, I feel like that's kind of what we do as parents, right? We find those little ways to still give you your fruits and veggies.
Yeah. I'm like, this is not a very healthy meal, but we sure do like it.
Hey, and that's, sometimes we just gotta put food on the table, and hey, this sounds like yummy goodness, so it's gonna work. Well, thank you so much, Jamie, for being willing to chat with us, to share your story. I know that sharing and being real is not something that is readily done by so many folks, but I think it is so super important. So I really thank you for your willingness to do it, and your willingness to even share a recipe with us so that folks can add this to their repertoire, because again, parents and oftentimes we're like, I'm so over kind of the same old
Right. Yeah.
every single meal.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for the invite. I feel really honored that you asked me.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much to our listeners. Thanks for joining us today. And hopefully you enjoy this mac and cheese just as much as my family's about to as well. And we'll talk to you later. If you or anyone that you know is struggling with any of the topics that we discussed in today's episode, make sure to check out our show notes for support and resources. You can get help. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode of The Real Family Eats. If you're a parent ready to share your real life parenting story, make sure to reach out to us in our website found in the show notes. And that goes for today's recipe, social medias, support, and resources. All of that can be found in our show notes. So make sure to check them out. And make sure to follow, like, share, subscribe, and stay up to date on all things The Real Family Eats. I hope you'll join us next time for more food for thought and thoughtful food. Enjoy your eats.